Now, we were talking to the Deputy Leader of Liverpool City Council about the big society guff, which I was expressing my surprise that any Labour council would have fallen for that guff in the first place. But at least they've seen through it now and have resigned, hauling the flagship Tory policy. Or is it any longer a flagship Tory policy? Was it just window dressing? A means by which the nasty party could appear slightly nicer in the run-up to the election. Tell me what you think about the big society malarkey, what you think about Liverpool as a council joining it and agreeing to be in the vanguard. Imagine Liverpool City Council in the vanguard of Tory policy. But at least now they've seen the error of their ways. We're talking also about Egypt. And we're talking about the cusp on which the media in Britain and indeed around the world currently stands. It's a cusp between the old days of mass newspaper circulation and 1, 2, 3 or 4 broadcasters and a new revolutionary era where anyone with a little bit of money to rub together can have a satellite TV channel and people can read, as I do now, all they want to read on the internet in the morning whilst they're still in their pyjamas and haven't had to go out to buy a newspaper. Me, as someone who used to read every newspaper I could possibly get my hands on, I now consume my news from the radio, from the television and from the internet. And most days I don't put my hand on a newspaper at all. The peg for this is that Rupert Murdoch has launched a new newspaper. It's one of these faces of the digital media, and he's called it The Daily. It's an iPad app, so you can only see it on the iPad, but it is a tremendously important new part of his business. It's got a budget of $30 million, it's got 100 staff, and everyone in the United States, at least, is going crazy about it. I've no reason to believe that it will not be very professionally done, as most of the things that Mr. Murdoch is involved in are very professionally done, but I've also no reason to believe that it will be other than rancid, reactionary, political poison, like everything else that Mr. Murdoch turns his hand to. That's my point of view. You may have a different one, in which case you can call me on 08717 223344. As I said, we're joined by really the best and funniest columnist writing in the British newspapers today. It would be a sad day if he were to disappear from the page, but it may have to be an electronic one. Here is Matthew Norman, formerly of this parish. Matthew, welcome.
Good evening, George.
Now, what do we make of this latest Murdoch foray into new media? It must mean, surely, that the page is turning.
Well, the page is dying, I think, is what it means, the printed page, yeah. I mean, for 10 years, people at the top of the newspaper industry here have sort of accepted ruefully that there is this extraordinary cultural shift away from printed word. You know, it must be the most dramatic shift of its kind since Caxton,
Yeah, since print was invented, yeah.
Well, exactly. And we now have a situation where even bright, young, engaged people of 35 and under never buy a newspaper. And we're getting to the stage now when people aren't buying books. The big booksellers are in desperate trouble, possibly more desperate than newspapers because of Kindle and e-books. So old boys like us may regret it, but there's no point being Luddite about it. There is this extraordinary, quick and powerful tsunami of change coming, and as always, you and I, perhaps not huge admirers of it personally or professionally, but we do we do realise that Rupert Murdoch, there's only one iron law of human existence in my view, and that is that after an awful lot of fuss and shouting, Rupert Murdoch wins. So
yes.
if he's putting all
so
his
far,
money
yes.
yeah, I mean, he always wins, and he'll end up buying Sky, so a lot of money and time and effort into this daily iPad newspaper, which I hear technically is brilliant,
Yes.
that it will speed up the death of newspapers in their current form.
Well, that's right. This realization, you're right, is some years in the making. The Guardian was ahead of the pack, producing a brilliant daily edition on the internet, which of course is very much more read than the paid-for printed copy. Millions, in fact, millions of people read the Guardian online. The problem is the Guardian doesn't earn any money out of that, and therefore,
precisely,
the people who write for it. I mean, you are a good reason to buy the Independent, but if fewer and fewer people are buying the Independent, and you start to write on the electronic page, how do you get paid?
Well, that's a question I'd rather not think about, really, because the mortgage is due any day now. I mean, it's a bit scary, to be honest. I mean, I'm sure, that journalism, it's not journalism that's dying. It's merely the physical format in which it's presented that's mutating. There was a terrible, catastrophic mistake made 10, 12 years ago whenever newspapers started going online, which is that they should have got together, all of them, globally, all the big ones, and said, we can't give away online what we charge people to buy in a newsagent, because, while people are happy to pay for things, they're not happy to pay for them if they've had them free for a decade or so. I mean, people are, if someone came in, and what will happen, they'll enforce, the use of water meters, and people will resent it enormously because they haven't paid it that way before. And in the same way, people are very loath indeed, and I am myself. I won't take out a subscription to the Times because I've had it free for all that time. So yeah, that was a disastrous mistake. Where the business model is that makes it work for newspapers online and on iPads and mobile phones and any other electronic form, no one seems to know. I mean, eventually it will happen, but we now have a very dangerous 10, maybe 15 years, in which the whole industry mutates, and there's this kind of hiatus when you imagine that governments and unscrupulous business people and rogues generally will get off much more lightly because newspapers cannot afford to investigate them properly.
Now, one of the reasons why it's difficult to lift money off the electronic page is how do you, the paraphernalia that's required and the complications of paying, even if you wanted to pay. I mean, there's no price sensitivity in this for me. I can afford to pay to read what I want to read online. But I'm not going to take out a credit card and fill in a long form and take the risk of my data going AWOL in cyberspace somewhere. It's the actual means of paying that's one of the main barriers.
Yeah, no, it's a horrendous problem, isn't it? They just haven't clocked yet how to have people's details and maybe charge them by the page, a fraction of a penny a page, so that it mounts up into enough revenue to fund the product. So as I said, a lot of clever people have spent a great deal of time working on this, and they still don't seem to be very close to doing it. So the casualty here, at least for the foreseeable future, is investment in journalism. Because the problem is, the only thing that will drive profitability online is good journalism. And at the moment, you see papers maybe bulking up in size or remaining quite heavy, but they can look very thin when it comes to the really
the content.
You see much less in-depth reporting from foreign trouble spots, unless it's a massive story like the one developing in Egypt. I just wonder now if there was a thalidomide-type scandal, there's no way that a paper like the Sunday Times, even with Murdoch's backing, could afford to put a huge team on it for 6 months, at a cost of, untold millions. It just couldn't happen.
There is an upside to all this, though, Matthew, and it's this, that fewer and fewer people are buying newspapers which are virtually without exception owned by rich and powerful men of a certain political stripe. Incidentally, in parenthesis, fewer and fewer people believe what they read in those newspapers even when they buy them. And more people are turning to a more plural media that is at least theoretically available online. I know there's the problem of sorting the wheat from the chaff, and what can you believe and not believe, and what tests, of authenticity and honesty are being applied to journalism that's online. But if you've got at least hundreds of places where you can get information, then the power of these media moguls is obviously savagely reduced, and that's got to be good.
That has to be good, as long as we remember the iron rule of human existence, that Murdoch will win in the end somehow. But yes, of course that's good. And there are other upsides. I mean, we now have, the police will be slightly wary about bashing people at demonstrations because they know that within half an hour, mobile phone video footage of them doing so will be posted on a website.
Yeah,
so I mean, but we are. Yeah, I think the feeling is that we're.
Of course, Mr. Murdoch owns YouTube too. So your iron law is being borne out.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a law of a proper law of life. Is that however promising something looks in this field, and however we might anticipate a kind of explosion of democratization of the media, in the end they will find a way of concentrating it in similar few hands as it is now.
Well, Matthew Norman, the Independent's brilliant columnist, will always be worth reading, whether online or in print. But for now, with his mortgage looming, you better buy the Independent to read him, so that the wolf can be kept from the door. This is George Galloway. This is The Week. This is Talk Sport. My number is 08717 223344.